So I do a monthly Q&A on my Patreon, and one of my patrons asked a really good question. This answer is quite a journey, so I thought it would be easier to explain it all in a video. So like most people, my interest in puppets sparked when I was a kid. I loved any kind of shows that incorporated cartoons, but especially anything that had marionettes or puppets or stop motion. Things like Pee Wee Herman, Mr. Rogers, The Muppets, Sesame Street, Wallace and Gromit, Nightmare Before Christmas. All of these shows really kind of shaped who I am today as an artist. I do remember as a kid, I used to cut out shapes out of construction paper and tape them to my old socks and make sock puppets out of them. I also really loved taking a paper bag and turning it upside down and drawing a face on it and turning that into a puppet. That's pretty much the extent of my puppet making experience as a kid though. While in high school, I would still come home and immediately turn on PBS so I could watch Sesame Street and Between the Lions. I knew these shows weren't for my age demographic, but I didn't really care because I enjoyed them anyway. I don't think I realized that at the time, but I think I was just really inspired by the way the characters had so much charm. They really inspired me to create more. So I began to experiment with three-dimensional work by the time I was in college. I started sculpting with clay, making stuffed animals, and even making these little posable monster things that Gus now calls greasels. I had an interest in making hand puppets and marionettes and doing stop motion, but I think I was too intimidated to even try. So I just kept it simple. In 2009, the movie Fantastic Mr. Fox came out, and it changed my life. It felt like a movie that was made just for me. The art style, the sense of humor, the color palette, the animation style. All I could think about while watching this movie was how badly I wanted to do whatever these artists got to do. So it was that movie that made me decide that I wanted to move to LA. The seed was planted then, and I finally got to move to LA in 2012. So I actually went to college for photography, which is another passion of mine. So I was still doing that for work at the time, but I still wanted to look into art school while I was in LA. Unfortunately, the schools that I really wanted to go to, like the Art Center of Pasadena and Cal Arts, were way too expensive. So I decided to take some art classes at a place called the Animation Guild in Burbank. I really enjoyed my time here and I learned a lot, but I didn't feel confident as an artist and didn't feel anywhere near as good as the other people in my class, so I kind of dropped out. So I decided to focus on photography instead and just keep art as something personal. I don't think I knew it at the time, but really I think I was just too afraid of rejection and not being good enough. So a few years later, in 2014, I saw the film Being Elmo for the very first time and was completely inspired. As soon as the movie was done, I pulled out my laptop and I looked up to see if there was any puppet making classes or workshops in the LA area, and luckily there was. It was this place called the Puppet School. Unfortunately, they're no longer in business, but I was able to take a one-day puppet making workshop there. And that's where Turkey was born. Turkey was the first puppet that I built that was kind of more of a professional style puppet. Making him and building a relationship with him really made me fall in love with puppetry specifically, and it became this newfound passion of mine. I posted a few silly videos of us lip syncing the top 40 tracks of that year, and a lot of my friends really enjoyed it and were entertained by it, and it made me happy that I could make people smile. In 2015, I met this guy on Tinder. His name is Gus. You might have heard of him. So we exchanged Instagram handles, and I remember after I sent mine, I felt mortified because I remembered I had all those videos of me in Turkey on them, and I had no idea what he was going to think of that. Sometimes people think it's weird, sometimes people think it's awesome. Luckily for me, he thought it was awesome. We ended up doing a lot of puppetry work together. Whenever he'd come over, we would do little skits with Turkey. And it was around this time that we made one of my favorite puppets we've ever made, which is Pepe, who's a chin puppet, and he just makes me laugh. I think it was really great to have somebody so close to me that was equally as interested in puppets as I am. But unfortunately, 2015 was also a tough year for me. I was struggling with grief and depression at the time, and I had art block for quite a few years. I really didn't create much in this part of my life. I would try to make things, but nothing could come out, and I would end up getting really frustrated. It was not fun. But after a lot of therapy, self-reflection, and self-care, I was finally able to pull myself out of it around 2018. So one day, I decided I wanted to teach Gus how to make a puppet. And that's the day Tuna and Bob were born. Making Tuna really ignited my love for puppet building. Whenever our friends would come over, we would introduce the puppets to them, and everyone got a kick out of it. And I would find a lot of people would say that they wish they had a puppet of their own. So I started hosting these little puppet making workshops for my friends. I really started to see how healing something like this can be for people. A few of my friends would tell me that they were just going to make the puppet for their niece or nephew, and then by the end of the class, they ended up keeping the puppet for themselves, and they still have it to this day. I just think puppets allow us to be a kid again and be silly, and that's such an important thing to connect with, and I think it's hard to not have fun when you're making a puppet. After doing a few of these classes, I really started to immerse myself in the puppet world and started posting more videos. I would take the puppets to parties and events, and overall just trying to get more comfortable with puppeteering around other people. In 2019, I went to this magical place called Camp Gritty. If you haven't heard of it, it's basically a summer camp for adults, and every year they do a talent show. This was my first year going, so I decided to do a performance with Tuna. I remember feeling really anxious all day prior to the show, so much in fact that during dinner I had to step away and hide in the bathroom to calm myself down. I almost had a panic attack. I texted Gus and told him I was too afraid to do it. I was afraid what people would think, and I really did not want to get on stage. But he sent me some words of encouragement.
I see pride. Can't hear you. I see power. I see a badass mother who won't take no crap off of nobody.
And convinced me to keep going, and I'm really glad I did. The entire room was filled with laughter and cheers and clapping. It was really surreal because I'd never experienced anything like that before, and I don't think I've ever performed on stage. After the show, everybody wanted to come up and meet Tuna or take a picture with her. And this meant so much to me because Tuna really is just a representation of like my inner 6-year-old. And I've never felt so embraced or accepted before. So I started sharing more puppet content online. And I even made Tuna her own Instagram account. So I'm going to do a quick segue to talk about how I got into Marionettes, because it's a little bit of a parallel timeline. So like I mentioned earlier, my full-time job was photography, and I had been hired to photograph a kid's birthday party one time in 2013. This crew of puppeteers showed up in a truck with tons of marionettes, and they did a live show for all the kids. I think I was the only adult who was super excited about it, and I think I was even more stoked about it than the kids were. And later I found out that this group of puppeteers were from Bob Baker's Marionette Theater. I remember being so stoked that something like this existed, and I promised myself I would go to a show one day. And I finally got to go on my 28th birthday, which was 5 years later. It was around 2013 or 2014 when I had first seen the film called Beauty is Embarrassing. It's a documentary about an artist named Wayne White. He actually worked on Pee Wee Herman, and he was a puppeteer, he was a puppet builder, and he did all sorts of stuff for the show. This is a movie I watch at least once or twice a year whenever I need to feel inspired again, because Wayne is such an artist. He does these really amazing, elaborate cardboard marionettes, and after watching that movie, I felt inspired to try to make one on my own. But once again, I felt too intimidated. So I just ended up making a cardboard sculpture instead of a robot, and his name was Rusty. So flash forward to 2020, I found out a puppeteer who used to work at Bob Baker's Marionette Theater was hosting a puppet workshop. He was teaching hand puppets, marionettes, clowning, and all sorts of things. I signed up for it, and that was actually the first time I learned how to operate a marionette. And even though I love marionettes, I have to admit I didn't enjoy it the first time I tried to operate one. It's really challenging and confusing, and I couldn't figure out how to get the puppet to do what I wanted it to do. So I just kind of wrote it off and said that I would stick to hand puppets. A few months later, COVID hit, and as you all know, we were sent into quarantine. Even aside from COVID, Gus and I were dealing with a lot of stressful things in our life, so I went through some intense art block again. But by the time May rolled around, I was feeling creative, so I decided I wanted to try to build a marionette. Because why not? The world was ending anyway, so I had nothing to lose. And that's when spaghetti was born. Making spaghetti really helped me have a deeper understanding of how marionettes operate. I had to have Gus's help with the stringing process, but overall, I think because I made a marionette from scratch, I was able to kind of figure out which strings do what. So I shared a lot of funny videos of Gus and Spaghetti hanging out, and really just started diving headfirst into making art and puppets because my photography had temporarily been shut down due to COVID. I think the silver lining of quarantine is it finally gave me a lot of time to explore my creativity in a way I had always wanted to, but never really had the time to do because I was running my photo business. But let's jump to 2021. Sometime in October, I was driving home from shooting a wedding, and this random idea popped in my head of making a ghost marionette. I can't remember how or why, but I just knew I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I ran to the store a couple days later, grabbed all the supplies I needed, and just started making. And that's how Stanley was born. I really fell in love with Stanley because he was so different from all the other puppets I had made. I shared a lot of the process of making him on Instagram and some other videos, and they were performing pretty well, so I thought I would try them on TikTok. I wasn't really active on TikTok or anything. I had less than 200 followers. I made a trick-or-treat video, posted it one night, and then woke up the next morning to thousands of views, over 1,000 followers, and within a few days, I had over 30,000 followers and 1 million views. It was really crazy to experience all this, and everything happened so fast. It was also really validating because this thing that brings me so much joy was also making other people smile. I really couldn't ask for anything more than that. It honestly really felt like a sign that I was on the right path because making the decision to stop doing photography was not easy to make. I genuinely love photography and have worked so hard to build a career out of it for over the past 10 to 15 years. But after COVID and quarantine, it just kind of put things into perspective for me that I only have one life, and if I really had to choose between anything I could do in this life, it would be to just make things. And that includes drawing and painting and puppets and whatever else I want to do. So now it's 2022, it's the first week of January, it's still a new year, and I've been thinking a lot about my goals in puppetry and my artwork. And I think overall, I just want to continue what I'm doing and explore more of my creativity and really lean into it so that I have nothing else to pull me away from it, and see what other kind of puppets and fun characters I can make. And I don't want to put too much pressure on myself either. I want to get back to the bare bones of just enjoying making things for the sake of making them without worrying about social media. When I share something online, I want it to be because I just want to share this thing that I made with you. I don't want to worry about numbers and the algorithm or anything like that. But I am excited to see what kind of characters I make this year. And that's my journey into puppet making. Thank you so much for watching. If you like hanging out with me and you enjoy my company, clicking that like button helps me a lot, and subscribing helps me even more. You can also support me by following me on Instagram and TikTok. And if you'd like to see more exclusive content like behind the scenes or bloopers or weekly updates, then you can support me on Patreon. All the links are in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you. Bye.
Well, I love you and thank you for joining me today on Pepe Bravo!